Welcome back to Cheryl's Kitchen. I'm Charlie Niner, the host, writer, and producer. My topics deal with violence, death, and traumatic things, so viewer discretion is advised. Today, I'm looking at one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century. He's responsible for the death of millions of people, and the same could be said of many dictators. He purged his party and his military. It's fair to say he was paranoid. And just so you know, I'm not talking about Adolf Hitler. I'm talking about Joseph Stalin, or the Man of Steel. Stalin was born to a poor family in what is now Georgia in December of 1878. He was ethnically Georgian. Now, when I say Georgia, I don't mean the state of Georgia in the USA. I mean Georgia that lives right next door to Russia. He was the son of a shoemaker, and his family was very poor. His father beat his mom and him constantly, so she and Stalin eventually left and wandered for a decade. Eventually, his mom, Ekaterine, got him into a school assisted by a religious fellow. Stalin had some health issues. He had smallpox. At the age of 12, he was hit by a carriage. His left arm was disabled for life, and not many people know of this. In 1894, he went to seminary school and did pretty well, but eventually he said he was an atheist and dropped out in 1899. Stalin joined the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, there's a mouthful, and this brought him to the attention of the Tsar's secret police, the Okhrana, and that's not a good thing. Stalin rose through the ranks of this party that eventually morphed into the Communist Party. He was the editor of Pravda, which in Russian means truth. Apparently, he was a good writer, as this brought him to the attention of Lenin, and he encouraged him to write more. Stalin was sent into exile a few times, once to Siberia near the Arctic Circle. He actually was in exile when he was conscripted for the First World War, but due to his left arm being crippled, he was rejected for military service. Stalin, in 1917, was a major player in the October Revolution, known as the Red October. He also backed Lenin for the most part, but Uncle Joe had ambition of his own. During the Civil War, Stalin ordered the Cheka to execute suspected counter-revolutionaries and had villages burnt to the ground, much to the disapproval of other Bolsheviks. Leon Trotsky vigorously opposed Stalin's conduct during the Russian Civil War, thus sealing Trotsky's own death warrant. Stalin was not Lenin's choice to succeed him. Trotsky was. When Lenin died, through his astute use of his position, gained control of the Communist Party. And that's when the killing really started. Excuse me, I have to flip the page. It had been suspected that Stalin had Lenin poisoned, but this has not been proven as toxicology tests weren't conducted on Lenin's corpse. The rivalry between Stalin and Trotsky was toxic. Stalin took charge of Lenin's funeral and conveniently gave Trotsky the wrong date. Therefore, Trotsky was not present at Lenin's funeral, a clear sign of disloyalty. Stalin was the general secretary of the party, and he was a very astute political player. Trotsky was a firebrand, and Trotsky was not an astute political player. There were many who desired to be the leader of the USSR, and Trotsky was but one and the forerunner. Trotsky was later exiled to Kazakhstan and actually was deported to Mexico in 1929. There's a lot more info online about Stalin, but I'll highlight just a few of his reforms. So his first one was the anti-religious campaign, and that was reintroduced. Communists are atheists, or are supposed to be. Any Christians, Muslims, or Buddhists were harassed, religious buildings were demolished, but the CPSU, the Communist Party, could never, ever eradicate religion. It's too deeply entrenched into the Russian psyche. A major famine occurred in the winter of 1932-33. Somewhere between 5 and 7 million people perished. Ukraine was severely affected, as were a few other areas. This is what we know as the Holodomor. Ukrainian people remember this. Whether it was deliberate or not, I am not qualified or not knowledgeable enough to say. By the way, Holodomor is Ukrainian for terror famine or great famine and actually means to kill by starvation. So instead of working with the kulaks and the peasants to perhaps relieve the famine and encourage them to grow more grain and raise more livestock, Stalin blamed hostile elements and the peasants for sabotaging things. And this is a typical response of the Communist Party of any nation. Blame someone. So let's talk about the Great Terror. A political ally in December 1934, Sergei Kirov, was murdered, causing Stalin to become a bit worried about his own demise. Kirov was shot, who knows why, but the murderer and his accomplices were convicted and executed in less than 30 days after the murder. This event started the Great Purge. One of the instruments of the Great Purge was the NKVD, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, headed by a sociopathic Lavrentiy Beria, who came to an untimely demise after Stalin died. This agency was responsible under Stalin's direction for the arrest and internment of millions of Soviet citizens, and the execution, they estimate, around 700,000. The bureaucracy was purged, as was the Red Army. Dissidents in exile were also hunted down and executed. Remember Leon Trotsky? He was murdered in Mexico in August 1940 by a Spaniard with an axe. How many people were executed? I think well over 1 million, with millions more placed in the Gulag, and many of those people died. I'm going to conclude this episode here, just prior to World War II, as Stalin's place in history during World War II really needs an episode. And that's when the killing really started. That's it for this episode. Keep your stick on the ice.